Philip II sat in the candlelight of l'Escor, all, in his hands. A single sheet of paper. The year was 1575, Madrid. Debt, 120 million ducats. Income, 3,040,000 times. He could not pay the interest. He could not pay his soldiers. He could not pay the sailors who guarded his empire. And he ruled the first empire where the sun never set, from Peru to the Philippines, from the Netherlands to Naples, from Mexico to Milan. 50 million subjects, the largest empire in history. The greatest accumulation of territory under one crown. This was the balance sheet of the world's richest man. And the first sovereign debt crisis in history. In 1556, Philip inherited an empire from his father, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Spain, Lord of the Netherlands, Master of the Americas. Charles had ruled an empire so vast that he is said to have spoken Spanish to God, Italian to women, French to men, and German to his horse. He left his son everything, and 20 million ducats in debt. Philip did not worry. He had the mountain. Cerro Rico, the rich hill. 1545. A shepherd in Peru followed his llama up a mountain. He saw silver, not a vein, a mountain of it, the largest deposit of precious metal in human history. The Spanish built Potosí at 4,000 meters, the highest city on earth. The air was thin, the cold brutal. Miners died by the thousands. But every year, 200 tons of pure silver flowed into Seville. By the late 16th century, over 200 million pesos had crossed the Atlantic. Each coin bore the Habsburg crest. Each one was weighed and counted at the House of Trade in Seville, before the king's own officials. The Mita system forced indigenous Quechua men to work the mines. They descended into tunnels 600 feet deep. The air was toxic. The mercury used to extract silver poisoned them. Average life expectancy in the mines, 6 months. Money like a tidal wave, an empire at its zenith. Philip was called El Prudente, the prudent. He rose at dawn. He worked at his desk until night. He read every dispatch, examined every account. The Escor all was his monument. A palace, a monastery, a tomb, a library. He built it to house his father's remains and his own legacy. But he was not a businessman. He was a believer. He saw the silver as divine favor. God had given Spain the mountain. God would provide. Philip built the Escor all, a palace monastery, tomb that took 20 years. He built the Armada, the largest fleet ever assembled. He flaunted Habsburg glory across Europe. But silver was not income. It was collateral, and collateral melts. The silver passed through Spain without touching ground. It paid German mercenaries, Italian ships, Flemish guns, interest on old debts. It built no Spanish mills, created no Spanish jobs. Every coin that landed in Seville was borrowed against before it cooled. The price revolution was underway. Between 1500 and 1600, prices in Spain quadrupled. The silver flooded in. Goods became scarce. Inflation devoured purchasing power. Spanish goods became uncompetitive. Dutch and English ships carried Spanish wool to Flanders, wove it into cloth, sold it back at profit. The Fouger family of Germany, the Genoa of bankers of Italy. They lent the king because he had the mountain, and because a king cannot be liquidated, the Fougers were the first true international bankers. They financed Charles V's election as Holy Roman Emperor in 1519. They held the silver monopoly. By 1557, they had lent Philip 4.7 million ducats. 1557, the mountain was not enough. Philip made a decision that shocked Europe. Sovereign bankruptcy, he would not pay. The Fouger family, bankers to emperors, collapsed. Their descendants were ruined. The silver they had financed flowed through their hands like water. Philip had an army. He had the mountain. The bankers had contracts. In 1557, contracts did not matter. The bankruptcy of 1557 was not total. Philip paid some creditors 20% of what he owed. Others got nothing. The Fougers lost 2.5 million ducats. Jacob Fugger, the rich, had died in 1525. His nephews ran the bank. They never recovered. The bankers devised an elegant arrangement. Receive silver in Seville, transfer it to pay Spanish troops in the Netherlands. A banking network built specifically to feed the war machine. But this only delayed the reckoning. 1560, the second bankruptcy. Philip spent 3 days in the Escor all's prayer room. Not asking forgiveness, asking his abacus. The war in the Netherlands was not going well. The Dutch rebels had adopted guerrilla tactics. They flooded the polders. They attacked supply lines. The Duke of Alba's terror tactics had failed. Executing Counts Egmont and Horn had only united the Dutch against Spain. Where was the silver going? The 80 Years' War had burned for 8 years. Dutch rebels swallowed half the empire's revenue. Towns to retake. Armies to pay. Ships to build. The Duke of Alba's army alone cost 1.2 million ducats annually. That is half the annual silver fleet. For one army in one theater. Philip looked at his ledgers. This was not a money problem. It was a bottomless pit. But ceasefire meant admitting defeat. The Habsburgs never admit defeat. To stop was to acknowledge the empire was bleeding into a hole with no bottom. So he borrowed more. Fought longer, doubled down. 1575. The third bankruptcy. No shock. No anger. Only fate. Debt, 120 million ducats, 40 times income. The Genoa bankers understood. This king would never repay. But they could not leave. They were in too deep, forced to keep betting on the mountain. The Asientos, the loan contracts, kept flowing. The bankers knew they were buying paper, but they had no choice. The alternative was admitting total loss. Philip needed something to show the Gen. Bankers, not victory. Just proof that the silver would keep flowing, that the mountain was still there. The glory of Lepanto in 1571, the great naval victory against the Ottoman Turks. It cost half the empire's annual revenue. But Philip needed that victory, even if it brought bankruptcy 4 years closer. Looking good mattered more than the numbers. The ledgers were bleeding, but the show had to continue. By the 1580s, the interest on Philip's debt consumed 40% of his annual revenue. He paid 2 million ducats a year just to service old loans. The mountain produced 8 million. War consumed the rest. July 1588, the English Channel. The Invincible Armada, 130 warships, 30,000 soldiers, 2,400 cannon, the pride of Spain. The largest naval expedition in history. The fleet included galleons, like the San Martin, the Santa Ana, the San Juan de Dios. Ships with 40 guns, ships built to dominate. Philip bet everything. Defeat England, control the North Sea, cut off Dutch supplies. One victory might prove the mountain was eternal. The plan was ambitious. The Duke of Medina Sidonia would sail up the Channel, meet the Duke of Parma's army in the Netherlands, transport them across to England. Simple on paper. Medina Sidonia had never commanded a fleet. He begged Philip not to send him. He wrote letters warning of English firepower. Philip ignored him. The king needed a loyal commander, not a capable one. The result, catastrophic defeat. English fireships on the night of August 7th. Panic. Ships collided. The armada scattered into the North Sea, into storms, into disease. Half the fleet returned, thousands drowned. The loss, 15 million Moravedines. The fleet's total cost, 2 months of imperial revenue, and the Dutch still fought. The English still ruled the waves. When Philip received the news at Eliascourt, he was praying. He read the dispatch. He kept praying. Then he filed it and moved to the next paper. 1596. The fourth bankruptcy, no announcement, no proclamation, silent default. The bankers knew. The soldiers knew. The people knew when the money stopped. By this point, Spanish bonds traded at 20% of face value. Genoa bankers who had lent 100,000 ducats could sell the debt for 20,000, or hold on and hope. Most held on. They had no choice. The mountain was still producing, but the claimants had multiplied beyond any possible repayment. Philip died on September 13th, 1598. His son Philip III inherited the throne, and debts that would never be repaid. Cerro Rico still produced silver. The mountain still flowed, but the empire was bankrupt, not financially. Bankrupt of belief, the faith that silver could solve everything. Philip borrowed 120 million ducats against a mountain that produced 3 million a year. The math never worked, but who would tell a king? In 1598, the silver still flowed from Potosí. The mules still climbed the mountain. The furnaces still burned. The indigenous miners still died. But the money that reached Madrid was already borrowed. The mountain kept giving. The empire had already taken too much. The Habsburgs would declare bankruptcy 3 more times before the dynasty ended. Spain would decline for 2 centuries. The Dutch, funded by Spanish silver, would rise. Amsterdam replaced Antwerp. The British would eventually inherit the oceans. The mountain outlived the empire that mined it. Cerro Rico produced silver until the 19th century. It produced tin into the 20th. The city of Potosí remains 4,000 meters up, a monument to extraction. But Spain collapsed. The lesson was archived, not learned. In 2008, banks sold mortgages on houses that did not exist. In 2022, crypto exchanges held reserves that were tokens of other tokens. The belief that collateral equals value persisted. Philip died believing. His son inherited the belief. The silver stopped in 1800. The belief never did. The mountain always looks eternal until it does not. The pattern holds.